Hello, and welcome back to the Anti-Conflation station, where I try to clear up some of the confusion that defines modern politics. This is a very exciting day for me. It's been a long time since I've been able to put out any new content. I'm finally able to again, obviously, and I'm so happy to be back here with you all. So I mentioned briefly in the last episode that in this episode I'd be talking about the Constitution. I've also decided to rope in one of my other favorite topics that goes hand in hand with the Constitution. The concept of the rule of law. Sounds authoritarian, right? However, the reality is quite the contrary. We'll get to that later. So back to the Constitution. Before we talk about the U.S. Constitution, I think it's important to ask ourselves the question of what is a Constitution? Now, although the U.S. Constitution is the world's first national constitution, several governments operated under a constitution before the inception of the United States, and many more constitutional governments were formed afterwards. Some of the ancient Greek city-states had constitutions. Rome had 4 different constitutions under 4 different eras of the empire. Each of the 13 colonies had their own constitution before the federal one was adopted. Probably most recognizable today is the English Magna Carta, which although is not technically a constitution in name, it functions in much of the same way. For those of you who don't know much about the Magna Carta, without getting too deep into the weeds about it all, in the early 13th century, King John of England was at war with France to regain some of the lands that were lost to France by his predecessor. To finance the war, King John highly taxed the barren class, which eventually led to a revolution. In 1214, when the war was ultimately lost for King John, he returned to London to find the revolution waiting for him. 1 year later, in 1215, the barren rebels captured the city, forcing King John to sign the Magna Carta, a social contract between the government and its people, maintaining restrictions on what the government was and was not allowed to do, basically affirming that the government is not just allowed to do whatever it wants. This is largely what a constitution does, restricting power from the government and maintaining regions of unalienable rights for its citizens. This is also basically how the U.S. Constitution works and largely how it was intended. In fact, in many cases, this is not just basically, but literally, as several constitutional amendments include phrases such as, Congress shall make no law respecting, and the rights of the people shall not be infringed. I talked about in a previous episode how after the Continental Congress had agreed that federalism would ultimately have to be observed and practiced, they got down to writing the Constitution, of which the Anti-Federalists agreed to be a part of as long as it included a Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, which secure rights such as religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, rights to defense, rights to property, judicial rights, and 2 of my favorite amendments, Amendment 9 and 10, of which Amendment 9 states, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. This amendment effectively affirmed the United States as a liberty-based society, and basically means that if something's not illegal, then it's automatically considered to be legal. And the 10th Amendment, which states that powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This again affirms the United States as a freedom and liberty-based society, essentially saying that freedom should exist as a triangle, with most of the power belonging to citizens and or local governments, and with that power deteriorating as you climb the ranks into state governments and eventually federal government. Now, as I mentioned before, the Anti-Federalists agreed to the Constitution on the condition that the Bill of Rights was included. The Federalists opposed this, however, not because they disagreed with the rights and securing those rights, but because they believed that in a freedom-based society, its citizens would never want to or stand for the alienation of those rights. And today we see that many of the amendments in the Bill of Rights are actually being questioned and challenged. So as time has passed, the Constitution has become kind of a mixture not only of amendments that restrict power from the government and reserve it for the people, but also including some amendments that give more power to the government. Some examples of later amendments that have empowered the people are the 15th Amendment, ratified February 26, 1869, which prohibits the denial of the right to vote based upon race. The 19th Amendment, ratified August 18, 1920, which secured voting rights for women. On the other hand, some examples of some amendment that actually gave more power to the government include the 16th Amendment, ratified July 12, 1909, which gives Congress the power to levy an income tax without appropriating it amongst the various states or basing it on the U.S. Census. And the 18th Amendment, ratified January 16, 1919, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, transportation, importation, and exportation of alcohol. So that's a pretty good basic rundown on the Constitution. So now let's move on to the rule of law. At its core, the rule of law establishes a society where no one person or people are considered to be the rulers, but rather instead the law itself is a ruler, an immutable property with communal laws that everyone must follow, and with clear, unchanging punishments. This is to ensure an utmost level of equality where anybody in the society, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, and in most cases age, are held to the same standard of law. But it also promotes inequality based upon the power structure, wherein every person is held accountable under the same laws, from the most powerless person all the way up to the President of the United States. So the rule of law ultimately restricts power from judges by removing the possibility of acting upon prejudice, and it also removes power from law enforcement in much of the way that the Ninth Amendment works, in that law enforcement's hands are somewhat tied in that they can only pursue someone for committing a crime. Now, it's kind of strange for me to talk about the rule of law because obviously it's not very well enforced. Celebrities, politicians, other high earners can almost do whatever they want to as long as they can post bail. In fact, many celebrities receive reduced sentences in the first place. And on the politician side, I'm sure there's thousands of great examples that I could use, but most notably and recently, in 2017, it was revealed that the US Congress has a taxpayer-funded slush fund for the purpose of covering up the legal transgressions of its congressional membership. So that's a pretty good basic rundown on the rule of law, and when practiced properly, how it works. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked it, I hope you learned something, and I hope you don't take my word for it. As always, I like to stress the ideas of critical thinking, questioning everything, and how strongly I believe that this confusing and conflationary state that modern politics is in largely comes from people's tendency to not question and just accept everything that's told to them, and I don't want to be that guy. So if anybody ever sees anything incorrect in any of my videos, I'm always very open-minded for your feedback and may potentially make some changes, because again, I don't want to be that guy. So please leave a like, please subscribe, that'll definitely help me out a lot, especially when it comes to getting more content out, getting content out in a more timely manner, and hopefully some better quality content. And be sure to tune in next time.